All right, recording in progress now. How are you?
All good, no complaints.
Good in sunny
How about you?
Texas?
It's actually a bit gloomy today. It's sort of like you brought the London weather with you.
Yeah, well, it's not too bad here in the UK, but it was pissing down this morning. So, all right, cryptocurrency. So you used to be AppSec, reverse engineering, malware. Like that's
Sure.
all you did, all you talked about. Now all you talk about on Twitter is cryptocurrency, smart contracts. So, like, first question, which, and I honestly, I haven't I don't know, just kind of kept up with it, I guess. Why cryptocurrency is going to change the world? Like, what's the big deal?
Oh, we got 30 minutes? Okay. Oh, that's a great question. I could say let's start with how I got into it, because I think there's a lot of people in my similar position where I was mining maybe a year after it came out, but I didn't have the right hardware for it, and I didn't really mine anything, and I kind of dismissed it as nerd money for drugs. And at first that's kind of what it was used for, but it wasn't until much later that I was working at a company that shared a floor with Coinbase, started thinking more about, hey, this company seems to be doing well. They're raising money. They have really smart people there. I should look into it more. And by then I'd been studying the Austrian School of Economics for a couple of years, and I had my CS degree, so I was a little bit more savvy in computer science. And I went and I read the Bitcoin white paper. It's very approachable. You don't have to be like super technical to read it. I'm sure most of your audience could handle it just fine. And it was very eye-opening. It was a solution to the Byzantine generals problem, which was, to me, it was pretty exciting because it was an unsolved problem in computer science. It was, how do you get, the original story has to do with like four generals coordinating an attack on a town. And how do you make sure they all go at the same time, even though some generals might withhold their armies or they might be intercepted, and the plans, how do you get everyone to agree on what's true without holding a gun to their head? Like, how do you, and it just seemed like an unsolvable problem, but Bitcoin solved it. And it also had all the properties of sound money, which is something I really wanted to invest in gold or something just to have, like, as to diversify. And here was Bitcoin. And it's like, okay, this seems like it could change a lot of stuff back then. But back then there weren't a lot of thought leaders or people talking about it. You kind of had to piece everything together for yourself. Now there's people much more eloquent than me, and you can I recommend everyone spend 10, 20 hours watching YouTube videos on it, because it's not going anywhere. Like, if you just look at the mind share, like I'm kind of a manager now, so I'm used to looking at things at a higher level. And when I see a GitHub repository, the Bitcoin repo, it has something like 30 something thousand forks and 60 something thousand stars and 35,500 commits. It is massive mind share, and it's a hive of activity. It's a buzz. There's always something going on there. And whenever you have a whole bunch of brilliant young people building something, you should pay attention. It could be like the next wave of technology. It's sort of like networking in the 80s, network programming, and people were arguing, what should the layers be? And TCP/IP was invented, and Ethernet wasn't always the standard, and there was BNC, and there's a lot of other. We're kind of at those early stages where you haven't standardized yet.
So
but that's just the high level.
So you use the word Bitcoin, but I'm assuming the phrase Bitcoin is ubiquitous to cryptocurrencies, or Bitcoin specifically?
It's another good question. I would draw a very thick line between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So I'm sometimes accused of being a maximalist, but I was really a big fan of Ethereum at first, and I eventually changed my mind on that, because all the other cryptos out there are more or less playing innovation theater. They're not really doing anything new. Bitcoin, in very many ways, wasn't the first cryptocurrency, it was the last. There were several other attempts before that were centralized and got shut down. As soon as they became a threat or were used for illegal activity or anything bad happened, they got shut down. And Bitcoin was the first one that was truly decentralized, where there was no central authority. Like, Ethereum was probably the second biggest crypto by market cap and by mind share. And they just switched to proof of stake, which means the people who own Ethereum more or less decide how the protocol runs. And I mean, they have very sophisticated arguments for why everything I just said is wrong. But just recently, it's been found that 51% of all the validators, the things in Ethereum that decide what transactions are allowed to happen, are censoring transactions. And this is the sort of risks that you have when it's the number of people who are participating in the network and validating the rules are centralized. It's expensive to run an Ethereum node. It's very cheap to run a Bitcoin node. You just need a Raspberry Pi and like 600 gigabyte hard drive and a dial-up internet connection. With Ethereum, you need access to AWS and you terabytes of storage and much better CPU. And almost every other crypto out there they're just trying to rug pull people. They try to get a bunch of hype. Maybe they hire some famous people to talk about it on Twitter, and then they take all the money and run. That's happened multiple times.
Right.
And then there are a couple of genuine attempts, but if you carefully read their white papers, somewhere in there they're saying, "Oh, we control everything, and maybe one day we'll be decentralized." But decentralization is an extreme design trade-off where you're not allowed to change things. The way Bitcoin evolves is like language. If you decided, right, aluminium is the correct way to pronounce it, it makes the most sense, everyone should pronounce it that way. You can't do that, even though it might be logical. You have to just convince everyone. So that's a big trade-off. But the thing with English is that it can't be, no one could snap their fingers and wipe it out.
Yeah. So, okay, so decentralized finance has some pretty major implications for the world, right? Like, how do you collect taxes? Like, if I'm restoring a house, right? The builder comes around, he wants a bit of cryptocurrency. I give him some Bitcoin, this whole value add tax thing kind of disappears. And so I guess it's similar to the notion of ransomware. I think, is it fair to say that ransomware really took off when people could collect money from it in a way that was, essentially anonymous?
Yeah, that's another good point is cryptocurrency, especially the privacy-focused cryptocurrencies like Monero, in the beginning Bitcoin, but now Monero, they significantly brought down the cost of ransomware if you are the criminal. So taking payments, ransomware existed back in the days of dial-up, but you had to send money orders or something. And that was, when you start touching the official financial institutions, then you can get shut down easily. But any new, the reason criminals are using Bitcoin and such for drugs and for ransomware is because new technology is always adopted where the friction is highest, and the friction's highest in crime. And so you're going to see the most gains and benefits in those high friction areas. And so yes, criminals, it's much easier for them to take payment now with ransomware. And in many ways, it became like an extremely efficient way of monetizing malware, which is that a lot of people in the malware industry know that malware isn't just kids pulling pranks anymore and making your printer print out, hack the planet or something. It's organized crime.
Yep. I was chatting to a journalist. I guess I won't mention the paper just in case I don't think it's a private conversation, but it was one of the major global papers. And he was saying that about 25% of the North Korean GDP is now from essentially crypto mining because they're getting around sanctions, right? The sanctions don't allow the money to go through, and therefore they're out crypto mining, which I thought was just frightening, right? Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, friction's definitely super high there. And that brings us to why maybe security people would be interested in Bitcoin, which is you have these totally new risk surfaces appearing, and you have this massive amount of value in these different cryptocurrency networks. So Bitcoin is, however many billions, then Ethereum and all the others, the sort of the long tail. But you have a lot of people writing code that are either smart contracts, which are things that actually operate on the blockchain, or they're writing wallet software, or they're writing websites that somehow interface with credentials and moving this value around. Talking tens or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of value being moved around, written by Bitcoin or cryptocurrency developers, and they're all like 20 something. There are no best practices. There's only first practices.
Yep.
And there's so many mistakes being made that the security industry, I think, should really, there's a lot more with formal verification that can be done and pen testing that could be done, because every week there's some new $50 million hack, $100 million hack. And it's all because these risk surfaces are completely untested and people don't really know how to do things properly yet. And things change so quickly that I've listened to a lot of pitches from a lot of companies, crypto companies, and they're all using their own jargon. Like it takes 25 minutes just to understand their slide deck because it's in their own particular language, and they're not doing it on purpose to be confusing. It's just they're inventing new things and new concepts, and they need words for it. So security it's taking a while to catch up.
So okay, so smart contracts. So I hear the phrase. I read an article about a betting company in the UK that was doing online betting, and essentially they were, if I understand correctly, they were smart contracts to define spread bets. So they would encode a spread bet into a smart contract, and some of these spread bets had ridiculous odds, but clearly ridiculous payouts. So how does smart contracts work, and how would someone go about attacking a smart contract?
A smart contract is just programmable money. So with Bitcoin, the scripting language is intentionally limited to not be what's called Turing complete, where there's a lot of things you're used to doing in a programming language that you just can't do. It's heavily restricted. And every transaction is a program, even in Bitcoin, where the program is something like, here is the proof that I own a private key associated with an address that you sent the Bitcoin to. And now if I wanted to send you Bitcoin, you would give me a receive address, and my wallet would write a program that says, I can prove I have this Bitcoin here, and I'm assigning it to whoever has the private key associated with whatever address you sent me. And that program goes to this ledger. And every smart contract is just an elaboration on that. So with Ethereum, a really interesting smart contract was someone created a VC, like a venture capital company, called the DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization. And it raised $200 million plus in like a week. It was super fast. But there were some bugs that they might have known about that they didn't fix, that people were trying to draw attention to. And it's just code. And as you know, code is bugs. And until it's been heavily vetted and heavily pen tested and perhaps formally verified, which is probably what you want to do if you're managing $200 million autonomously. Mm-hmm. And because mm-hmm. code is kind of law, there is no, oh, you called your bank, you sent your money to the wrong address. You can't call anyone to fix it for you. You have mm-hmm. to put your big boy pants on. And so this smart contract is reality. This is physics. This is what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And if you have a bug mm-hmm. in that, which is extremely easy to do if you're a human being, then there's a problem. And because the tooling around writing smart contracts isn't super mature, and the languages aren't super easy mm-hmm. to formally verify, mm-hmm. and it's not very common. Even let's say the NFT craze, the smart contract for NFTs had obvious bugs in it that were causing it to be much more inefficient than it needed to be, and this just escaped the people who are writing it. So it's like everybody suddenly has the technology to manage millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of value, but the industry is in no way sophisticated enough to handle it. So you could, and often these contracts you can view them on the blockchain. So the way you would go exploiting them is just understand all the technology and start looking at the code. And I think that's why you see hacks like every week coming up where it's tens of millions of dollars. Some bridge was just hacked last week and keeps going.
So the code for the contract actually sits on the blockchain and is visible to anyone to see?
It depending on the cryptocurrency you're using, but yes.
And in Bitcoin, that's true.
In Bitcoin, it's partially true. They're moving in a direction of you can prove as much as you want to prove, and keep private as much as you want to keep private. So I can prove I have access to funds, and I can prove that certain aspects of a smart contract are true, but I could make a transaction that is actually a smart contract that has lots of different conditions. I can make that appear as if it's a normal transaction, and then a year later reveal that actually that transaction had some aspects of it that had some other conditions.
Right. I mean, options trading or futures trading is just going to be fundamentally changed by that type of thing, right?
Yes, it's 24 hours, 7 days a week. There are no, if you're used to crypto trading, you're used to a lot of variability, a lot of ups and downs. So you're probably right at home in the stock market now, which is kind of doing the same thing. And there is no off hours. And well, the more financial instruments we get in the crypto space, I think we'll see things smooth out because we'll be able to price more information into the market. And so the more investors get in and the more you have futures and options and all the other instruments, then it allows people to hedge their bets and price more information in, and you should get less volatility.
So, okay, so I guess cryptocurrency still has a questionable reputation among the public, right? Which is fair to say. And I guess also a questionable reputation among everyone. It's like kind of a bit of a joke. Oh, another cryptocurrencies, another crypto company's been funded, right? And if you follow term sheet, the fortune thing, I mean, God knows how much money, and every single day there's another cryptocurrency company that's been funded. Is it a case of long-term real bets, or is it a case of gold rush fever where the real people that are making money are the people selling the shovels to the gold miners and not the gold miners? Like which of those two is it?
Yeah, I think it's more of a gold rush. I think it's a lot like the dot-com boom, where it's amazing looking back at that. It's like, I can't believe people thought they could just build a website and then money. Like step one, build websites. Step two, question mark. Step three, infinite money. And that's what's happening right now with a lot of cryptos. And you don't even have, the market isn't even asking, what innovation are you providing? They're just saying, oh, the founder said they can get Elon to tweet about it, so this thing is going to go to the moon and we're all going to get rich and buy Lambos. There's no discipline in them. There's no education. And I think it's going to be a case where everybody gets burned. And as every time they get burned, they start thinking, where did I go wrong? And they'll eventually learn what it is that makes Bitcoin special, and all the others are sort of playing innovation theater.
Yeah. And do you think it's because the technology is so either misunderstood or so complicated? I mean, crypto is incredibly complicated under the hood that it's very hard for people to actually make informed decisions, and therefore they're relying on people that it's kind of like the one-eyed. What's that phrase? In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Is it that kind of case that's happening, or?
Oh, for sure. Oh, yes, definitely. Not only is the technology complicated for most people, self-custody, for example, is it's like I have all these wallets and these addresses, and there's a wallet, but it doesn't really contain coins. It contains keys, so it's really like a keychain, and it's sort of like asymmetric key. Like, what is all this gobbledygook? I don't get it. But I remember when I was using the internet and I had to memorize IP addresses, and I had to there was a point, if you wanted to send an email, you had to telnet into a mainframe and compile the mail client yourself. And now we're to the point where anyone can just pick up an iPad and send an email very quickly. So we're at the very early stage of a technology. It needs a lot of design work. There's a lot of terminology that's confusing. Everything has been designed by programmers. It's like the worst front ends in the world are made by back-end engineers, and all of them are like that. And the problem is, normally a technology is allowed to develop and get easier to use, but in this case, it's a money. So it got a lot of crypto bros and investor bros in it very quickly, and it drew a lot of attention from people who, probably don't have any understanding of how it works.
Yep.
And then it's on top of that, the philosophy of Bitcoin, and specifically, is very much challenging fundamental beliefs that people have, especially if you live in the West, you kind of have a lot of financial privilege. Like, I had never heard the term financial inclusion until I got into Bitcoin. I started learning that 2 billion people in the world don't have access to banks, and another 2 billion people in the world are sort of underbanked, where it's very expensive for them to get to they'd have to travel like 100 miles to get to a bank, and they don't. If I want a loan, or gosh, when we're living in the Bay, you can just go to Sand Hill Road and you can ask for $5 million, and people with a straight face will take you seriously and listen to your slide deck, and maybe you can raise around that way.
You will have a load of VCs coming to you after this, let me tell you.
Yeah. It's you're kind of, if you have a dumb idea, it was a joke. Like, if any dumb idea can get $5 million in the Bay. But there's lots of places in the world where if you wanted to get a small loan just for a capital investment. Maybe you want to buy some camels or a cow or some machinery or something. You can't get it because you just don't have access to that stuff. And what Bitcoin does is it puts a bank in everyone's phone, and it lets you transact value. I can send someone in the Central African Republic $100 right now, and it could take less than a second over the Lightning Network. And that, I think, is going to change a lot of things.
I guess you get to the point of like micro investing, and there's a democratization of doesn't matter where you are. Yeah, like you say. Okay, super interesting. So, go on.
Another aspect of where it's helping poor communities is power infrastructure. I mean, Bitcoin mining gets a bad rap because there's some, I would say, alarmism about how it might impact the environment. But what I'm seeing, I live in Texas, and we have a lot of oil out here. We have a lot of energy companies. And whenever you crack open an oil well, you get a lot of gases released. And what they've been doing traditionally is they just burn it. And I come from an area where you could see them burning gas, off-gassing all the time, off in the distance. It was dystopian. It looked like Gedi Prime from Dune. It looked like it was terrible. But that's just wasted hydrocarbons. And there are companies now that they'll just show up with a little cargo container, and you plug the gas in one side, and out comes money on the other hand, because they're turning energy into Bitcoin. And that's so useful because energy is a very local phenomenon. And there was an area, because it's so expensive to move it around, it's hard to transmit. There can be legislation, or there could be rules involved with moving gas around. There were places, and I just read last week, in Kenya, they built a bunch of hydro dams, and they brought the cost of electricity way down. And the reason they were able to get it done is because they were mining with any excess energy. So with power production, it is very hard to control demand. You have to predict demand very accurately, or you lose power. We lost power twice last night for a couple of seconds because you have to predict this, minute to minute. And with Bitcoin, it's very easy to turn off and on. So for the first time, power companies have the ability to control demand instead of they can only control supply. So it gives them a buffer, like a layer of fat on a person. And it can justify capital expenditure to create new power plants. I mean, there's something like 1.1 billion people living on less electricity than a super modern energy efficient refrigerator. That number goes up to over 3 billion if it's just like an average refrigerator. I mean, less power than a fridge. So you wake up in the morning, you pop in your espresso pod and your espresso machine, and you make some toast, and you pull something out of the fridge, and you have the air conditioner going. There are people living in the world where they don't even have access to 24-hour electricity. It just turns off at 10 p.m. and turns back on at 5 a.m. What Bitcoin does is it says, right, you can spend, El Salvador just got $200 million investment to build a solar array for a Bitcoin mining. So now you can justify having a bunch of money spent to build power production, and the grid's more stable because you can control the demand. You just call up the miners when demand is high, say, hey, could you dial it back a bit? And in exchange, you give them a cheaper rate, and they're happy because they're getting a cheaper rate, and you're happy that you can keep the lights on.
Okay. Less around cryptocurrency, I guess, and more around blockchain. You keep seeing, I mean, the security industry is full of bullshit, as you know, and there's they'll attach to any single word, machine learning, artificial intelligence, whatever, and blockchain seems to be kind of, one of those that's happened for quite a while. And so, you've got companies like, oh, we're using blockchain to put logs onto a blockchain. So they're, we know the provenance of logs and things like that. What do you think are legitimate uses for blockchain within current security tools? Not security tools that aren't for cryptocurrencies or aren't for themselves.
I've thought about this. I've had a lot of conversations with VCs and other people about this. You're right. Everything you just said, I agree with completely. The thing is, you can kind of replace blockchain in your head with immutable append-only database, and ask yourself, would this benefit by having an append-only database? Probably not. Most of the time, I mean, you could just set up MySQL and configure it, or Postgres and configure it in a way that it's append only and you can't change any
So
records.
you just said blockchain's like a worm drive, essentially. Is that what you just?
A what?
A worm drive.
What's a worm drive?
You're too young. I'll let you look. I'll let you Google it. After.
Okay, I'll look it up. Look it up. Yeah. So yeah, maybe like a memory tape or something. It's the usefulness of a blockchain is when it's decentralized and there is no one central point of failure, and there is no throat to choke. If someone like Putin didn't want a transaction to happen on Ethereum, I think he could kidnap 5 or 6 people in the Ethereum community or kidnap their families and make that transaction not happen. If you wanted to censor a transaction in Bitcoin, good luck. It's not going to happen. And that's an extreme design decision that most products don't need. You don't need the insane complexity of a decentralized blockchain. If you just want to have the blockchain data structure is from like 1970 something. It's not that complicated. Git uses a blockchain under the hood. Every Git commit has a hash of the previous commit there. Not that special, but there's just a lot of hype in it right now. And if you say the word blockchain, and you have a slide deck that looks cool, you could maybe convince an investor, like we were saying earlier. There's just a lot of money in the system. They're just
dust your PowerPoint skills off. Dust your PowerPoint skills off. All right, we're coming to the end. So there's always a few humorous questions. I had last time. It was most of these were recorded when the day after the Queen died, which was quite amusing. But I'm going to give you European ones again because you live in Texas. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll avoid the slurs. All right.
Fine.
What are the 4 capitals of the countries in the United Kingdom?
What are the countries in the United Kingdom?
Can you give me a hint there? Capitals of the countries in the United Kingdom. We're not starting that low.
Let's see. I'm guessing London. That could be one. Ireland is probably part of the UK, so Dublin. That's a city I know in Ireland. Scotland, right? Is that a country? There's pretty much Mexico, Canada, America, and then Europe. That's how the globe works in my brain.
All right, I'm not even going to go there with scoring you on that. To think that Ireland is part of the UK is, back to the drawing, folks. I've got to reassess the questions because all of the rest of them were a lot more complicated than that. Okay, well, you can guess. We'll just have guesses. Is Norway part of the European Union or not?
I really don't know. I know that there was an exit from at least one country, but I don't know about Norway.
Yeah, that was shameful. We won't go there. Europe. So the third question was going to be the 2 cities where the European Parliament is, but you're not going to have a hope in heck of getting this, are you?
European Parliament?
2. It's in 2 cities.
2 cities. I think I was reading something about this morning, and nope. Denmark, something. Yeah, if you want to see me embarrass myself, ask me. My wife is watching that sort of drama about Queen Elizabeth. If you'd ask me questions about that, I would.
Is she watching The Crown?
Yeah, it's great. I've been watching it too.
Well, it's scandalous here today because they've just announced that the next series of it is going to be about Prince Charles plotting to get rid of the Queen. Which is, it's just not going down very well at all. I'll leave it there.
Still alive? Like you can't.
What? Who's still alive?
Which Charles?
Charles, who's now king.
Yeah, you can't,
because they wind it back, and so like 20 years ago, they were up to Princess Diana now, and now the prince is basically plotting to get rid of the Queen, which is just in very bad taste, I think. But anyway, I'm not a royalist, but I think that's in pretty poor taste. All right, then last question then. Name one principality in Europe.
I got nothing.
Yeah, you are the smartest guy in the world with 0 geography knowledge. I'm just going to lay it down there.
Sure. Yeah, I fully appreciate that. Oh yeah, I could ask you some questions about Texas history next time, maybe.
No, I would. No, we'll pass.